Okay, let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. This will be the first sort of substantial class for PHL247. We're basically covering the material in the first chapter of the textbook, which I see at least some of you have got. I'm very glad to see that. We're going to start fairly slow. We're going to cover formal and informal reasoning today, and basically that means we're just going to talk about the difference between something being true and something being valid. So truth and validity are the main concepts that we're working through today. We'll start from the concept of arguments, which I talked a little bit. I think I said most of what you need to know about arguments as a concept last time, but we'll start there again. Then we'll talk about inferences, which are the heart of arguments. Arguments are collections of statements that are supposed to justify an inference. And we'll talk about the parts of an argument, which are premises, conclusions, and then the things that you can say about an argument, which is that they are either valid or sound, invalid or unsound. So those are the concepts, the basic concepts that we'll go over today. That'll be the first, so I'll talk for a while, and then we'll have a short break, and then I'll hand out sort of exercise sheets. So I hope everybody brought pens and or pencils, and you'll spend a little time working on those, applying the concepts that I'm about to talk to you about, and then we'll have another short break, and then we'll come back together and review the answers to those things. And I'll post the exercise sheets on Blackboard with answers once we've kind of gone through them. So I'll be recording the part where I'm mostly talking. I won't be recording the part where you're sitting in silence working on your things, and I won't record the parts where we're discussing, because that'll hopefully be a lot of you talking when we're discussing the answers. So it'll just be the me talking part that gets recorded, but I'm doing that now. So does that all sound good? Do you have any questions about basic course mechanics? Has everybody been able to access the Blackboard? No problem there. So I just posted the first quiz, which it's out of, I think it's 30 questions or so, something like that. You can retake it as many times as you like, and it'll tell you, I believe it'll tell you at the end what your mark was, so feel free to keep retaking it until you get 100%. Those are the kind of questions that you'll see on the midterm. At least the multiple choice questions will be of those form, maybe a little harder, because I don't think the quiz shouldn't make you like sweat bullets or anything. It is not designed to be terrifically challenging. If you do find it terrifically challenging, that's fine. That means this is the exact right course for you. We've got the skills that you need, but it should be fairly straightforward. This is my first time trying to do a quiz on Blackboard, so if something has gone terribly awry, please let me know as soon as you can. Somebody email me if you try it and it's just not working for some reason. Please get in touch. I might not have done it exactly right. I think I did. I hope I did, but please let me know. Okay, so let's proceed. If there's not any questions about any of that stuff. Okay, good. So arguments are the central topic of the course. We're trying to understand how arguments work, what makes a good argument, what makes a bad argument. And I said last time, there's a bunch of terms in this course where we're going to be using a really common term as a term of art. That is, so forget everything that you usually know about arguments. So usually when you say an argument, you mean like me and somebody had a back and forth and like I come away thinking that they're mean or something. You know, an argument is like a conflict-filled conversation or something like that. And that is not what an argument is in this course. That's not how philosophers use that term. So for the purposes of this course, an argument will mean exactly and only this, an idea or set of ideas given as a reason to believe another idea, right? And that doesn't have to happen between two people. It's perfectly common to have an argument that you present to yourself. So you think about one idea, and then you infer that you should believe another idea on its basis, and then you've presented to yourself an argument. Yeah? Should be straightforward. So, arguments are the main topic. And an argument, I want to get this right off the bat very clear, An argument is not the idea that you're presenting as a reason to believe something, which is a premise is a reason for believing a conclusion. A conclusion is the thing that you're trying to show, trying to justify. An argument is neither of those things, and you're probably used to referring to arguments as being like, well, I gave them an argument for so-and-so, and what you mean is you gave them a premise that's meant to cause them to believe so-and-so. Or if you just say a thing, that could sometimes come off as you're giving an argument. If you just make a strong claim, like present a conclusion with a certain like authority or something like that, that's sometimes referred to as giving somebody an argument. But in this class, we mean only this, the combination of premises and a conclusion, and either the explicit or implied inferential relation between them. Okay? So do keep that in mind. All right, so the example from last time, my legs are itchy, therefore that's poison ivy. So my leg, the itchiness of my legs is being presented as a reason to believe that the plants that you just walked through were in fact poison ivy. Fairly straightforward. This is an inductive argument. This is you shouldn't be certain that that was poison ivy, but you've been given evidence. Similarly, the lights are on is evidence that somebody's home. Right? It's something that should help you believe or cause you to be more likely to believe that somebody's home. Actually, that's putting it in a bit too psychological a sense, right? It's not, we're not really even interested in what will cause you to believe things, because some very silly things will cause you to believe things. Like there's studies that show that if you put up some science facts and then have like a brightly colored image of a brain scan beside it, people are more likely to believe the science facts, even if that has nothing to do with the brain picture. So lots of weird things will cause you to believe things. This class is about what justifies you to believe things, right? So there's a justificatory relation, or like a well-justified inference between presumably the lights being on and somebody being home, or at least that's what's being presented as an argument here. Okay. Again, we're starting slow here. This should be all fairly crisp and clear. Mostly we're just laying out the vocabulary, and we're using these words like, again, argument in a fairly strange way, in a fairly technical way. So I want you to all to be very much comfortable with that before we even get into this stuff. So an inference is when we try to justify one thought or an idea using another. So the first is given as a reason to believe the second. And as I mentioned in the introductory class, if you were able to say in general, in any case, when one idea justifies another, you would be completely finished the project of philosophy, quite a lot of math, like logic, and quite a lot of science as well. So inference is complicated. Inference is incredibly complicated, and it can be made simple in some specific circumstances, like if I say, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's a really solid inference, and there's no ambiguity about it. Because it's a pattern of it's a really reliable argument pattern. But in practically all of the cases that you'll encounter in your life, and in practically all of, for example, philosophy and science, when one idea justifies another is often a matter of controversy and ambiguity. And this is what we're trying to do here is learn to navigate those ambiguous cases. Right? So I'll try to give you a handful of the deductively valid argument patterns where if you have an inference of the following form, it's always reliable. Like you can have a few of those in hand, but in general, you're going to have to deal with the weird and murky questions around inference that aren't always going to have a very crisp, clear answer. This little arrow is incredibly complex. It describes an incredibly complex set of relationships. Right. So we've got a variety of inference indicators in the language. So the chapter in the textbook goes on quite a bit about the different uses of language. We're going to kind of skim over that, but obviously not everything is an argument. Not every sentence that you can produce or collection of sentences counts as an argument. And we'll distinguish a few things that look very similar to arguments, but aren't. So But when you find one of these words, it's a really good chance that somebody's trying to indicate to you that one idea is being presented as a reason for believing another. So if you say blank, therefore blank, so-and-so, since so-and-so, so-and-so. Implies, consequently. Because is a tricky one, because often because is not being offered as an argument indicator, it's being offered as a causal indicator. So you're saying that, like, if heat causes water to boil, you're not, so the water's boiling because it's been heated. That's not necessarily an argument that the water is boiling. You might be offering an explanation. So because can often indicate a causal explanation, and explanations are different than arguments, oftentimes. So be careful with because. It follows that, given that. And sometimes it's just the context. Sometimes none of these inference indicators will be present, and you just have to look at the sort of conversational context and infer that somebody's trying to present an argument to you. So, right, for example, these are all arguments. These are and we're really starting at the very simplest possible arguments, and we'll spend the rest of the course gradually ramping up the complexity. So we're not going to stay at this level, but like, let's start there. So I'm hungry, therefore we should make dinner. Since I'm hungry, we should make dinner. I'm hungry, thus let's make dinner. Nobody talks like that, but you could. Because I'm hungry, we should make dinner. The fact that I'm hungry implies that we should make dinner. I'm hungry, consequently we should make dinner. So those are all explicitly marked as arguments by these inference indicators. Right? And I'm hungry, comma, let's make dinner can also be an argument. Right? There's no explicit inference indicator included in the sentence, but under some conditions, we'll talk about the conditions under which you can infer that something is an argument. This can be an argument. Right? So the fact that you're hungry is being offered as a reason to believe that it's time to make dinner. Not an outrageous claim to be making. You don't really need a very strong argument for that one, but it is nonetheless doing the job that we say arguments do. Okay. And there are basically two types of inference indicators. One that indicates that here's a premise and here comes the conclusion, and the other that indicates that here's a conclusion and then here comes the premise. So all I want you to take away from this is that you cannot infer from the order of things which one is the premise and which one is the conclusion. Right? So the exercise that we'll have you do, one of the exercises that we'll have you do after this is identify which part of this argument is a premise and which part is the conclusion. So if I say, I'm hungry, therefore we should make dinner, I'm hungry is the premise, is the reason for believing, the conclusion, we should make dinner. So and so, thus, from which it follows that, so, consequently. These are all ones where the premise is presented first, and then you get the argument, the inference indicator, and then the conclusion comes next. But of course, you can switch that around where the conclusion is presented first. So the fact that we should make dinner is shown by the fact that I am hungry. Not a very nice way of speaking, but you get the point. So the fact that we should make dinner since I am hungry. Something like that, right? So because, from which it follows that, is based on for. Each one of those are premise indicators, and the other ones are conclusion indicators. Fairly good so far? Okay. I hope none of this is blowing your mind so far. This should all be fairly tame, easy stuff. It will get harder as we go along, I promise. Okay. So, one of the things that will get more complex as we go along is the question of what is an argument and what isn't. It isn't always clear just from the surface form. And there are a variety of things that look like arguments but aren't. For example, strongly worded conclusions. And again, this is one of those points where your normal way of speaking would count a strongly worded conclusion as a kind of argument. But just saying what you think is not to present an argument. This is an absolute plague in undergraduate essays, where undergraduates will basically just say what they think. They're asked to present an argument, and they'll just say elaborately what they think, rather than saying why we all should think it. So although this sounds incredibly trivial, I guarantee that people make this mistake quite a lot more than you would like to think. Another thing which is fairly easy to distinguish from an argument is just a story. It's like a collection of things that happens. The hard one is explanations. So we'll talk about what's the difference between arguments and explanations in just 1 second. Okay. So compare the following 2 tweets. This is a Democratic senator from California, I think. These are just grabbed off my Twitter feed. So which of the following 2 are arguments? One or both or neither. So this fight to defeat the GOP healthcare plan is going to take all of us standing together, hand in hand, #SaveOurCare. Is that an argument? Yeah.
No, because it's just kind of stating what she thinks without backing it up.
Exactly. So she's made a claim. We have to do this thing that she said, but she hasn't actually given you any reason to believe it, right? She's just sort of assuming that you're going to be, well, that the recipients of her tweet are going to be, happy to see this. They already believe it. Their beliefs are kind of going to be affirmed and, possibly reinvigorated. Or possibly, if you didn't already believe this, you might just be mad at this person, right? She just, gross. There's not a lot of room to make an argument in a tweet. Okay, so but how about this other one? Is this an argument? We need to stop saying folks are going to lose their health care if the GOP repeal bill passes. We're not losing it, they're taking it away. Is that an argument? Yeah. Why?
The last line kind of supports the distinction that she's making.
Right. So the conclusion that she wants you to believe is we need to stop saying that folks are going to lose their health care, and the reason that she's offering for that is we're not losing it, they're taking it away. Okay. So this, I hope, is a nice example of how something can count as an argument without being very convincing, even. Like, this isn't, I don't think this is a terrific, if you didn't already believe that this, so if you didn't already believe that the Republicans are doing something bad, this is really not going to convince you, is it? Right? It is an argument, but it's not necessarily like the best argument you ever saw. Yeah?
Compared to Kamala Harris, Twitter only allows like 200 characters.
That's right. Okay, yeah, that's right. So it's really hard to make a good argument in less than 200 characters. It really is. So we can't really blame her for that. It's not the right medium for that. But what I want to get clear on is that calling something an argument is not necessarily to say that it's important or convincing or anything like that. You can have really bad arguments. Probably these are about equally convincing. If what you're wanting to do is shift people's opinions about healthcare, these probably do about the same level of that. Like, I don't see any big difference in how rhetorically powerful these are. So recall the difference between logic and rhetoric. So rhetoric is the art of convincing people of things. And these are probably have about equal rhetorical force, in my estimation. I don't know, really. But so calling this bottom one an argument is not to say that you should be convinced of its conclusion. It's not to say that it's going to be convincing. It's not to say that it's even all that interesting. Like, her conclusion is that we should stop saying that people are going to lose their health care. And she just wants you to rephrase that slightly. Like, it's not even a groundbreaking conclusion that she's arguing for here, is it? Like, it's just like we should it's not even, the conclusion is not even that Republicans are bad and Democrats are good. The conclusion is just we should have a slight rephrasing of the way we describe things. So to call something an argument is not to say that it's got an important conclusion either, right? Good. So the top one is a strongly worded conclusion. The bottom one is an argument. But don't conclude from the fact that something is an argument that it is interesting, important, convincing, true. Like, it doesn't even have to be contain true sentences in order to count as an argument. It just has to have this inferential relation in it, right? So one thing being offered as a reason for believing another thing. Yeah? Okay. This one's easy. Stories and just random collections of thoughts. This is one from the textbook. We drove to Moncton to visit Sally in the morning, spent the afternoon in Sackville with Ono and his family, then stopped at Betty's for dinner in Amherst. By the time we arrived in Halifax last night, we were happy about visiting friends, but tired from all the driving. That is not trying to convince you of anything. That's just like a series of things that happen, right? Okay, easy. That one's easy, right? Okay, the hard one is explanations. So what makes this particularly hard is that explanations can also be arguments. Arguments can be explanations as well. Actually, the philosophy of explanations for most of the 20th century said that explanations are always arguments. And then we kind of drifted away from that view. But so is the modern view that not all explanations are arguments, and not all arguments are explanations. But they can be the same thing. Okay, and let me try to clear up when you should call something an explanation and when you should call it an argument. So an explanation is where you know a thing and you want to know why it's true. Okay? So arguments are when you want to know whether something is true. So before Newton, everyone knew that the tides go in and out. This is extremely common. People were completely aware. Anybody who lived near the water was aware that it goes up and down on a fairly regular basis, right? So we knew that there were tides. Everybody was convinced of that. The thing that we wanted to know was, why are there tides? So we were not looking for an explanation, or we're not looking for an argument that tides exist. I mean, the argument would be sit by the beach for a couple of days and you watch it come in and out. What we wanted was an explanation. Of course, Newton's explanation was there's an invisible force emanating from every piece of matter that connects to every other piece of matter, drawing it towards it. Right? So what Newton's doing is positing something quite unknown and poorly understood in order to explain something well-known and relatively well understood. And so we knew all about the tides, and what we wanted to know was, why are there tides? Now you can contrast that with an argument where the conclusion is something that is not necessarily well known, right? So you might not before you receive the argument, you might not believe the conclusion at all. And you usually have to pick out something that you can agree on to justify the belief that the conclusion is true. So in an argument, you start from things that you can agree on and move to something controversial or less well known. Whereas an explanation, you can start from things like, hey guys, there's an invisible force that permeates the universe. You can't see it, but it's binding us all together, both the sun and the moon and me to the earth and you to me and all that stuff. Yeah.
In your Newton example, it seems a bit unclear how, I guess, his view isn't an argument for why that is the case.
Right. So why is Newton's thing not an argument? So Newton had to provide an argument for his picture of gravity, right? So he produced a bunch of evidence and he produced a bunch of elaborate arguments for why his theory of gravity was right. But the explanation of the tides assumes that you believe the theory of gravity and then uses it to explain this very well-known thing, right? So just in that sense, it's an explanation, not an argument. His books and his writing were full of arguments for his theory. But the theory was less accepted and less well-known than the tides, certainly. Yeah?
But is the differentiation between explanation and argument somewhat relative based on like the context in which it's being said? Like, let's say you are talking to physicists and you mention something like gravity versus somebody in perhaps, I don't know, sociology or something you might not use.
Yeah. So on the basic point, yeah, is the difference between an argument and an explanation context dependent? Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. So it depends on the knowledge state of the person who's receiving the argument or the explanation.
So just based on that alone, you could actually say or argue, to use the layman term, like what is actually an explanation, what is an argument?
Yeah. So you can.
Solely on what like the context is.
Absolutely, absolutely it is. So I think the best we can do here in terms of distinguishing arguments and explanations is give you the conditions under which it would be one or the other, and then we have to leave it up to you to apply those conditions in the context. So like, yeah. So this is going to be a running theme in this course that I can give you the basic rules. I can give you the rough picture of when something is going to be true or when it's not. But there's always, not always, there is very often going to be ambiguities that can only be resolved by the specific context that you're in, and that's what makes this informal reasoning rather than formal reasoning. So if what I just said about like context and the specifics having to determine things makes you deeply uncomfortable, then probably symbolic logic would be a better course for you. That's where things are clear. That's where things have real, definite answers all the time. You don't need to know anything about the world. You just, you just derive things. But that's not what we're doing here. This is the class where we try to deal with situations where context matters, and that's going to be most of your life, usually. Like outside of the context of proving theorems in math or writing computer programs. Even writing computer programs, you probably you can make sure that it compiles without knowing anything about the world, but to know whether it's going to be useful, you also need to know a lot about the context as well. Anyway, I'm rambling. Okay, so here's the basic picture. Arguments start from well-known premises, right? They start from things that you should either know already or be willing to agree on, and move to a conclusion that is less well-known and or perhaps less agreed upon. So the premises should be stuff that you can agree upon. The conclusion can be something that you might agree upon, or it can be something that is controversial or not really well known. Whereas explanations oftentimes start from something unknown or unexpected. They don't have to, right? But sometimes you can explain something just in terms of well-known, well-understood facts. You just didn't put them together, but they show that these facts that explain entail something reasonably well-known. So in an explanation, you already understand the thing to be explained. What you want to know is why, and that can be less well-known. In cases where both the first part and the second part are well-known, there's not really a difference between arguments and explanations. Right? So in a context where all of the facts involved are well-known, well-understood, or well-agreed upon, they're kind of the same thing. Yeah?
Does that mean that an explanation lacks a stated conclusion?
Typically, explanations have stated conclusions. Typically, they do. Philosophers talk about the explanans and the explanandum. So the explanans is the part that does the explaining, and the explanandum is the thing to be explained. So philosophers typically think that explanations are supposed to have, like a complete explanation is supposed to have a well-formed explanandum, which is kind of the analogy to a conclusion. But oftentimes we leave parts of these things out, just in informal context. So maybe you don't articulate the explanandum, but it's supposed to be there. Okay? All right. So sometimes it's very clear when something is an explanation and when it's an argument, and sometimes you need more facts. So again, this bothersome context stuff pops up. So, for example, the tides go in and out because of the gravitational attraction of the moon. I just told you I think that's an explanation because what we're explaining is the tides going in and out, which everybody knows about, whereas gravitational attraction, at least at the time, was less well known. But I suppose in a different context, like if you know nothing about tides, suppose you just lived in a landlocked city your entire life, you've never heard of tides, but you know about gravitational attraction and the fact that the moon attracts water, you might think, oh, I can infer. I know very well that there's gravity. I don't know how the oceans act, but here's an argument that the tides should go in and out because of this well-known thing, gravity.
But like, so, but don't we know that now? Like,
Oh, I mean, we the royal, we know it for sure.
so like, just like, out of curiosity, if that was like on a test or something, could you say either because both are like essentially well-known facts? Because the context is kind of implied that we live now. Like, I would never say the
Yes.
context is assuming I was in like
Yes.
pre-dating science.
So you bring up one of the tricky issues of this course, which is that I'm going to have to give you tests that don't depend on context like that. Like, I'm going to have to ask you questions where you don't have to, like, suppose I'm in the 1850s, or suppose if there's relevant context, I have to provide it to you on the tests. We're going to do a bunch of stuff where the context is less clear in class and in exercises. I'm going to do my absolute best to only give you unambiguous questions on the tests. They got to have true or false answers, basically. Like, there's only there will be a couple short answers where you might have a little bit more ambiguity, but they're mostly going to be true, like either multiple choice or true false. So I have to do my very best to give you unambiguous questions when you're under test conditions. So I will do that. I don't want to promise that I will succeed at that attempt completely. But if we find that, I'll try, but if there's like 80 of you now, the 80 of you put together have much more brain power than I do as an individual. Like, you as a collective are much, much smarter than I am. So when you all 80 look at a test, you very well might see things that I didn't see. So if we find something where I've asked a question and it turns out to hang on some contextual ambiguity, then I think I'll just have to either remove that mark from the test or just give it to you. I think that's the only fair thing to do. It happened. I don't want to tell you that I'm going to write bad tests for you, but it did happen last semester a few times where, a fully tenured professor and 3 philosophy PhDs all looked at the test and went, yeah, this all looks good. And then when we gave it to 300 people, they very quickly found things that we'd missed. Because, again, 300 people are just going to be, the collective brain power of 300 people is vastly larger than the brain power of a small group of people. So I'll try my best not to give you weird, ambiguous, contextually dependent questions on the midterm or exam. And if I fail, then we'll just sort of retroactively, please let me know. I'm sure you will if you find some, and we'll handle it retroactively. Does that sound fair? My attempt is going to be to give you the least ambiguous questions I can. Okay, so explanation or argument. There must be some kind of insect in the trees. The leaves all have holes in them. Do you think that's likelier to be an explanation or an argument? Argument? So what is an argument for? Yeah. Sorry, what is in an argument? Which part of this is in? Right, so there must be some kind of insect in the trees. If this is an argument, this is a conclusion, right? And this conclusion, so there must be, it sounds like you're inferring this, right? There must be sounds like, well, I don't actually know, but I think there is, because of this well-known thing. So presumably, you can see whether the leaves have holes in them or not, right? So you've looked at the tree, there's holes in them, and then you make this inference from this well-known fact about holes in the leaves to an apparently unknown causal agent, the insects in the trees. That's how I would interpret that one. Okay. My cat is afraid of loud noises because she had a difficult life as a kitten. Yeah?
I think that's an explanation.
Sounds like an explanation to me. So the cat being afraid of loud noises is the thing that's being demonstrated? Yeah?
You just say that for being an argument, the premises don't need to be convincing.
Right.
So I think the third one can be an argument as well.
Interesting. Okay, so this could be, right, so this one could actually probably go either way. It depends on what you know a lot about, right? So if you know that your cat is afraid of loud noises,
The premises is my cat had a difficult life as a kitten.
Ah.
And the conclusion is my cat is afraid of loud noise.
Yeah, both can be known if it's your cat.
So the question is, yeah, and what does it depend on? So this is, I think you're right that this one could be read either way. And so you can read it as an argument or you can read it as an explanation. And this is, again, it depends on the context, right? Depends on what you know about this cat. Do you know, for example, that the cat is afraid of loud noises? So if you know that the cat is afraid of loud noises, then you're kind of explaining that using that she had a difficult life as a kitten. If you know that she has a difficult life as a kitten, maybe you're giving an argument. So, yeah,
Do you know whether that's ever true or not?
which is true.
Like, you can make the explanation that the cat is afraid of loud noises because she had a difficult life as a kitten.
Yeah.
But like, you don't know that for sure.
That's true. Okay, yeah, that's true. So in this case, if that's an explanation, so suppose we're trying to explain why that she's afraid of loud noises and we're citing this, oh, I knew that she had a difficult life as a kitten. So imagine a context, you got a cat from like a hoarding situation where the cat's all like deranged and kind of weird. This is my cats are like this actually. They're very afraid of loud noises because they had a difficult life as kittens. So I try to explain to myself, why are my cats so afraid of loud noises? I know that they had a difficult life as kittens, and that's for me, so this is the well-known explaining this thing. Or sorry, this is something that you might not know about them being used to explain an apparent fact about them. Now, can you know that for certain? Probably not. Like, this is an inference that I've made based on what I know about them. Is it a 100% reliable inference? No, definitely not. Definitely not, right? So it's something that, it's a plausible explanation as far as I can tell, but it's certainly not, none of these are going to involve certain knowledge. And that's where most of the messy, ambiguous stuff happens. If you have an inference that's deductive, that is, that the premises guarantee the conclusion, it usually fits a number of, small number of patterns that you can fit it into. You say, aha, this is like a syllogism, and in those cases, you can be certain of the conclusion if you're certain of the premises. Most of the things that we're going to look at are inductive, which is the ones where even if this is an argument, it's because it's not an argument that should make you certain about the conclusion. Yeah. Okay. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west because of the rotation of the earth. Argument or explanation? Yeah. Explanation. Why? An explanation of what?
Explanation of why the sun rises in the east and sets in the west.
Good.
Because it says because of the rotation of the earth.
Good.
Just explaining why it's rising in the east and sets in the west.
Excellent. Excellent. So this is, I would interpret this, I naturally interpret this as an explanation. You can probably cook up some context in where this is an argument, but I naturally interpret this as an explanation of the sun rising in the east and west. This is an extremely, if you've been outside any time other than the nighttime or the daytime, like during sunset or sunrise, you're probably aware of the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. Right? It's very accessible information. And you say because of the rotation of the earth, which is less accessible. So you're using this less accessible fact to explain the more accessible fact. Okay, now the fun one. It is likely that the fleens have failed to terp due to excessive frac. Okay, none of those words mean anything, as far as I'm aware. What would need to be the case for that to be either an argument or an explanation? Somebody give me a scenario in which that is an argument. Yeah.
Where you don't know whether or not, or it's uncertain that the fleens failed to terp due to excessive frac.
Good. So that's an argument. So it's likely, so if you don't know what the fleens are up to, you haven't seen the fleens lately, but you do know that there's excessive frac going on, it's everywhere, then this is probably an argument for this, right? So it's unknown what the fleens are doing, but you do know about the frac, so you're making an argument. Okay? Can anybody flip that around and give a scenario where this is an explanation? Good.
you can try to explain it by like theory crafting. Maybe it was because of crack.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah.
If you know both, they could be either.
That's right. So if you both observe the fleens and all of the crack that's going on, then this could be either an explanation or an argument. Good. Good. Now you've got the form of it. You can do it without the content. Very good. Yeah.
One thing that sticks out, like based on the text, is that it talks a lot about
Intent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you're actually trying to persuade someone.
Yeah.
In that context could, I guess, what may seem like an explanation also be an argument, if the intention is there.
Absolutely. I mean, so yes, absolutely. I think it's often the case that something is both an explanation and an argument. And that can be based on your intent. I mean, exactly what it is you're trying to do usually determines what the meaning of your words are. So your speaker's intention usually has a strong determinative influence on what how your sentence should be interpreted. So depending on how you present the sentence, it will probably mean different things, and in that context, that can determine whether it's an argument or an explanation. So again, this is for the formal thinkers among you, this is all probably extremely unsatisfying. It's messy, gross, but that's language. That's human language. Okay. So in all of this, I took particular care with the explanation stuff because it highlights a really interesting and important feature of premises. This is something that I want to get on the table right away and to get you really clear on. So the whole point of premises is that they should either be something that we can agree on or that we know how to check. Right? So premises are where you start your argument from because they're the common ground. Right? Sometimes in complex arguments, we give reasons for believing premises. So you have a premise leading to another premise leading to a conclusion. You could call this middle thing a sub-conclusion if you wanted. There's really no... Whether you call this a sub-conclusion or just another premise doesn't really matter all that much. For the purposes of this course, I propose to call anything that's not the conclusion a premise, if that's okay. But the thing about premise is that there's always going to be some in your argument that stand unjustified, right? So you can see if you what would happen if you tried to offer reasons for believing all of the premises in your argument? What would you be introducing? More premises, right? That's what you do when you give a reason to believe something is you give a premise. And then you have another thing that you need to justify. So you introduce more premises, and then you have to justify that as well, right? And you get this infinite chain of justification. And you can't write infinite things. You can't say infinite things. So in the entire history of arguments, all arguments have always contained at least some unjustified premises. All of them, every time. Some premises are so obvious that nobody would disagree with them. Those are really good premises. Those are the premises you like because you can develop common ground. Say, okay, look, everybody agrees 2 + 2 = 4, right? Good. Okay, now we can use that to justify something else, and maybe use that to justify something else. So the premises are you looking for common ground in your discussion, right? The number one most common criticism, if you ask a group of undergraduates to write a critique of an argument, the number one most common criticism they give is that premises were presented without support. Please do not write that on your argument analyses, right? Because of this. Because all arguments contain unsupported premises. Last semester we did a, yeah.
I was just going to add, is this like a general thing or like students specifically that took this class?
Oh, no, just students all over the university. do this. I've marked hundreds and hundreds of undergraduate essays in a variety of different courses. They do this all the time. Everybody does this who's asked to analyze an argument. It's not just students either. People in general do this. They say they see something that hasn't been defended in an argument, and they say, aha, you didn't defend that premise. Ha ha. Gotcha. And that just shows that they don't understand how arguments work, because you can't. Premises are your starting point. Premises are supposed to be your common ground. That's not to say that you can't question premises. That's often a good move in an argument, right? Often the thing to do is say, oh, well, I don't believe that premise. But just the fact that they have not supported it is not sufficient, right? The thing that you have to do is say, this premise is implausible, right? This premise is something that we don't have to believe. This premise is questionable for this and that reason, right? Or that it's unlikely to be true or something like that. There has to be some special reason why you shouldn't believe that premise, why it's worth questioning. Just the fact that they haven't supported it really doesn't tell you anything. But you do need to, you do need to come up with premises, and the best premises are ones that, if you're in a debate, so if you're offering arguments back and forth, the very best premises are ones that both you and the person that you're debating with can agree on. Because that's when you can build this common ground and you can develop the sort of the disagreement from some fruitful place. If you can't agree on any premises, you're not going to have a conversation. You're not going to have a meaningful exchange. So premises are where you start. Yeah?
You keep saying premises are where you start, but then why would you need a premise for a premise then?
Well, that's one of the reasons why people want to call this middle thing. It's a good question. So why have we got, if premises are where you start, then why have we got this premise in the middle here? That's an excellent question. That's why some people want to call that a sub-conclusion rather than a premise. That's fine if you want to say that. Yeah, it's just a linguistic convention one way or the other. But so the top premises are where you start. Perhaps that. It's great. I mean, if your middle premises are things you can agree on as well, that's even better, right? You want to have as much common ground in a debate as possible, which is kind of counterintuitive because most people think of debates as like a kind of fight where you're trying to undermine the other person as much as possible. And I can tell you from vast personal experience that that's just a really unproductive way of talking to people. You just, if you spend your day just trying to undermine absolutely everything that somebody else thinks and says, you're not going to convince them of anything. So if your goal is to convince anybody of anything, your first step should be trying to find things that you agree on, not trying to find little nitpicky things that you can make them look like a jerk about. So, right, so premises. They come unjustified. Usually they come unjustified. Really good premises are ones that you can agree on. All right. Okay, so that was arguments, validity, or that was arguments, premises, conclusions, and inference. Now we're going to do validity and soundness. So this is, we need a break? What time is it? Whew, wow, we do need a break. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and do validity and soundness. Let's start again. Let's polish this lecture off and then we can do the exercises. There shouldn't be too much more. A few people asked me last time whether we'd be taking the full 3 hours. I doubt we'll take the full 3 hours on any kind of regular basis, but I don't want to say go ahead and make plans for 7:30 every Monday and Wednesday. So yeah, we'll have to see how we do. And if you're feeling just utterly exhausted by hour 2, please let me know, indicate in some way, because there's no point in just sort of having you grind away at tasks and having no, we're going to use up all of your cognitive resources, but not go any further than that. So let me know when your brain is full, I guess is what I'm saying. Right, okay, so validity and soundness. This is another point at which I'm going to ask you to use extremely common, ordinary words in a slightly new way. Arguments, I will claim, are never true or false. It's not what arguments do. Exactly two things in the universe can be true or false: statements or beliefs. That's it. Those are the only things that can be true or false according to the sort of philosopher's definition of truth and falsity. Right? So a statement or a belief is true or false just in case it corresponds with reality in some sense. Right? To the degree that it's true, to the degree that it correctly represents reality. Arguments don't really represent reality in that same sense, not in the exact same sense. What they do is justify one belief by citing another belief. Right? So arguments can be valid or invalid, sound or unsound, not true or false. Again, people use the words true and false in a million different ways. Like woodworkers talk about boards being either warped or true. You talk about a true friend, or something like that. That's not what we mean in this class by true. Right? So of all of the many meanings of that term, I want you to focus on just this one where something is true in case it is a statement or a belief that corresponds to reality, and false otherwise. All right, so validity. Validity is when, if the premises are true, then the conclusion is also true. Validity is judged only in terms of the relationship between the premises and the conclusion. This is one of the most counterintuitive things for people to get at the beginning of this process, because an argument with false premises and a false conclusion can be 100% perfectly valid. Right? So validity is just about the relationship between the premises and the conclusion, and something is valid just in case, if you believe the premise, then you should believe the conclusion. Yes?
So it's like how it's used, not what is used, right?
It's I don't really see the distinction you're making between it.
No, like,
So
what is being used as in whether the premise is true or not, and how the premise is being used for the conclusion.
right, okay, I see now. So yeah, so it's not what fills in the premise spot here. It's whether the thing that does fill in the premise spot gives you the conclusion, if it's true. Okay, so soundness, on the other hand, is validity plus truth. Right? So a sound argument is one where the premises are true and the argument is valid. So all sound arguments are also valid. And sound arguments are great because you should always believe the conclusions of sound arguments. Right? If the premises are true and it's valid, then you are sort of rationally obliged to believe the conclusion of that argument. Sound arguments are what you want. An argument can have both true premises and a conclusion, but be invalid. So that is, you can say one true thing and offer it as a reason for believing another true thing, but it not be a valid inference. Right? So that's unsound and invalid. Right? Yeah?
So do you mean like using the combination of your premises to come to arrive to your conclusion, that there must be some way of getting there?
So what?
I remember in like traditional, because it might be a bit different, like 'cause in 245 it's like you can have two premises and a true conclusion, but they could almost have nothing to do with each other. You just basically said two statements and you just said like that little connection that
Right.
because so and so. Like,
Right. So in 245, I think the definition that they give of validity is it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false.
are we
So
using a different interpretation?
no, it's the exact same. It's the exact same. So in this case, it might be, as a matter of fact, the case that the premise is true and the conclusion is true,
Okay.
and yet the argument is invalid because it's possible for the premise to be true and the conclusion to be false.
I see it.
Okay? So let's get into examples. So trees are tall, the wild grass is pleasant, therefore water is wet. Right? They're just unrelated ideas, right? All of those things are true, but that is not a valid inference. Because if trees were not tall and the wild grass was not pleasant, it could nonetheless be the case that water is wet, and vice versa. Sorry, I think that was the wrong way to put that. It could be the case that the trees are tall and the wild grass is pleasant, and nonetheless be false that water is wet. Suppose it's frozen or something. Suppose all the water's frozen, none of it's wet. Right? It's just the problem here is just that the first two things don't count as reasons to believe the third thing. That's all. Right? So it's all true. It's just that the two top premises are not reasons to believe the conclusion. So that is unsound. Despite the fact that all of its premises are true, because it's invalid, it's also unsound. Yeah?
Is validity, I guess, a matter of degree to the extent to which you could believe the conclusion based on how strong the premises are?
Philosophers are somewhat divided on whether it makes sense to talk about validity by degrees. They often talk about, and I believe the textbook talks about, logical strength by degrees. So validity is kind of the extreme case of logical strength, where if the premises are true, that guarantees that the conclusion is true. And we can talk about various degrees to which premises might make you believe the conclusion or might be reason to believe the conclusion. So an inductive argument is one where the truth of the premises should increase your confidence in the conclusion, but maybe not to 100%. Okay, so yeah, that's a distinction. I sort of left that distinction out of this discussion, but it's in the textbook, where validity is kind of like the extreme case of logical strength, and we can talk about the different degrees of logical strength that an argument has. Similarly, you can have valid but unsound arguments. So arguments where both the premises and the conclusion are false, but it's nonetheless a valid argument. Okay, so all humans have 6 legs. Untrue. I am a human. That one's true. Therefore, I have 6 legs. Untrue. However, if it was the case that this, by the way, is the kind of notation that we'll be using throughout. This is a kind of what they call this setting a logic book style. The argument P1 is premise 1, premise 2, C is conclusion. So clearly these premises include at least one falsehood, and the conclusion is likewise false, but this is a perfectly 100% valid argument. It has perfect logical strength. It's as logically strong as anything can be, because if the premises were true, then you should believe the conclusion. Okay. So this is kind of the core of formal and informal reasoning, separating out truth from validity. And it asks you to treat your brain in a way that it might not be used to if you haven't done this style of formal reasoning before. Usually what your brain likes to do is check whether the statements are true and then be done with it, because it's a quick and easy way of evaluating things, right? You say, oh, well, that all sounds plausible, it's probably right. So we're trying to separate those two things out for you. We'll do a bunch of practice on separating the idea of things being true from being valid. There's another one, valid but unsound. The Earth is flat. Flat things always have edges. Therefore, the Earth has edges. None of those things are true, right? None of those premises, neither the premises are true. The conclusion is obviously false as well. But it's perfectly valid. Because if you believe that the Earth is flat, and if you believe that flat things always have edges, then you must believe, or that you really should believe. As a matter of psychological fact, you might not always believe the things that you should believe, but you should believe that, therefore, the Earth has edges. Yeah?
If I were to add a third premise, let's say some apples are red in there, right?
Yeah.
Now, would it still be a valid statement? Because you're not using that premise, right, for the conclusion.
So do irrelevant premises affect validity? I don't think they do affect validity. So if you had P3, apples are red, I think that would still be a valid argument, because if the collection of premises are all true, then you should still believe that the Earth has edges. And so there's nothing about putting an irrelevant premise in there that would make P1 and P2 cease to imply C. And that's what makes it valid, is that if the premises are true, then you should believe the conclusion.
You should be using at least one premise to infer your conclusion, right?
Oh yes, any argument must have at least one premise. Yeah, yeah. We had a brief conversation about during the break about whether arguments can have no premises or no conclusions, or the trivial case where the premise is identical to the conclusion. So like, can you have P1, the Earth is flat, conclusion, the Earth is flat? Is that an argument? And I think the answer is, kinda, sort of. Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that just a statement, though? That's
It-
not an argument per se, it's a statement.
So just the statement, the Earth is flat, is just a statement. That's absolutely correct. If you say the Earth is flat, therefore the Earth is flat, I think you're just being silly. I don't know what else beyond that. I don't know what to say about that. Whether that should count as an argument or not, that's not going to be on the test.
Trivial argument, essentially.
I guess so. It's a very valid argument, because if you believe the premise, then you must believe the conclusion, since the premise is equal to the conclusion. But it's not an argument in the sense so we said we defined arguments at the beginning as one reason given to believe another reason, and perhaps we should add a little proviso on there that it's got to be a different thing than the first thing. That's fine. Okay, so valid but unsound. We can also have an invalid argument. Here's an example of an invalid argument with true premises. So, or at least, let's take them as true. Be generous with these premises. Imagine that they're true. So Tom Cruise is vain. All actors are vain. Therefore, Tom Cruise is an actor. Okay, that is not a valid argument. That's a classic example of an invalid argument. Well, not these ones exactly, but the structure is a classic error. Let me spot why that's. Why is it the case that if these things are true, it does not lead to this thing necessarily being true? Yeah?
Because it doesn't mention that Tom Cruise is an actor.
It doesn't mention that, no.
The premise.
It doesn't mention that, but an argument is supposed to take you beyond what you already believe to believe something new, right? So it's not always going to be the case that you. So if we had as a premise that Tom Cruise is an actor, then there's a very short argument, right? So get another one here. One second.
Well, because you don't know if all vain people are actors.
Aha. Was that what you were going to say?
It seems like he's like assuming the consequence.
That's right. That's right. Or you're affirming the constant. All actors are vain. Something like that. It's one of those. Right. So what we haven't said is that. So what? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say the conclusion could be false and the premises could all be true.
That's right. That is what makes it invalid. So it could be that Tom Cruise is vain. Suppose he retired. Here's a scenario in which the premises are true but the conclusion is false. Suppose Tom Cruise retires from acting, but remains vain. I don't even know if he's vain. Maybe he's a very nice person, but let's suppose that he is. All actors are vain. You cannot therefore conclude that Tom Cruise is an actor. He retired. He's not an actor anymore, right? So, generously supposing that these kind of cruel and implausible things are true, the premises are true, these two things validly entail, or do not validly entail this, even though they might all be true. Yeah?
The strength of the inference and the conclusion is less, or to a lesser strength, would it be more valid?
Aha, okay, so you're thinking, I think I know what you're thinking. So Tom Cruise is vain, all actors are vain, therefore probably Tom Cruise is an actor, or something like that, or maybe Tom Cruise is an actor. Then you could get a reasonable inductive argument. So if it was the case, for example, that, here's another way you could make this into a valid argument. Say, Tom Cruise is vain, all and only actors are vain, then this follows validly. Right? So if only actors are vain, then the fact that Tom Cruise is vain deductively entails that he's an actor. And so that was the problem with this, is that nothing in this says that only actors are vain. There's lots of other ways to be vain. Right. Yeah?
Suppose you changed is to was.
So Tom Cruise was an actor?
Yeah, because then you can't really say that, I mean, even if you assume P1 and P2, I mean, P2 I think is just, like, you just look at it, it's objectively false.
It is objectively false, yes.
But if you were to assume that, there was no way you could arrive to a false conclusion because he once was an actor.
Right. Well.
So would that be then a valid argument?
Well, okay, so.
There wouldn't be a way to disprove it though.
No, I think that would remain. So where does a was go here?
Well, Tom Cruise was an actor.
Tom Cruise was an actor.
No, the
Sorry.
conclusion just.
The conclusion. Tom Cruise was an actor.
Yeah.
I think that still does not validly follow, because in that one scenario. So the way I sort of showed you that this isn't valid was positing that he retired, but it's possible that Tom Cruise was never an actor, right? So suppose that's the case.
But it isn't.
Okay. Okay.
But I mean, like the conclusion, like if you were to assume P1 and P2, there's absolutely, assuming those two things,
Yeah.
there's nothing, and also assuming that C said, therefore Tom Cruise was an actor, that's, I mean, you're not assuming the conclusion ever, that's just like something that you claim follows, but you can't disprove that though. Like, I get that
Well,
one of the premises could be objectively false, but you have to assume it's true in order to conclude validity, but nothing says anything about the conclusion, right? Like, there's no way, because the conclusion would just be an absolute truth.
I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. So maybe a different example would help here. So try to think of a different one. So squares have flat side, or sorry, this object has flat sides. All squares have flat sides. Therefore, this object is a square.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that.
Right, because it could be a triangle.
Right.
Right. So this is the classic fallacy, argument fallacy. Yeah.
Sorry, what was the issue with this argument?
The issue with this argument is that it's
If we say Tom Cruise was an actor, what is the issue? Because the conclusion is still not entailed by the premises.
That's right. That's right. I mean, this is supposed to be an example of something that has, I mean, if we're being generous with my premises, it could have true premises, but it's not valid. That is, that the premises do not entail the conclusion. Right? So, yeah, that was the main idea of this. Good. Okay. Good. Good. I feel like you're getting this. This is good. All right. And the reason why you should care about any of this is because all of us have this thing called belief bias. So psychologists have shown over and over again in a variety of different contexts that good, well-meaning, smart people have this thing where you're more likely to believe an argument is valid if you believe its premises and its conclusion. Right? So people have trouble separating out believing the parts of the argument from telling whether the argument is a good one. This is a plague on our, for example, political discourse, where people accept shockingly weak arguments for things they already believe. Right? So if an argument is arguing for your side of things, people are much more forgiving with that argument than if it's arguing against your view. And this is not something that you can just talk yourself out of. You can't go, oh, well, I'll stop doing that, and then just stop doing it. It's not something that you can, there's no switch in your brain that just turns this off. Furthermore, taking this course will not cure you of this. This is what I'd like to warn you about. This is not a surefire cure for belief bias. You're stuck with it. You're stuck with actually all kinds of cognitive biases. The best that you can do is be aware that all of us have this. Well, there's individual variation in this, and there are things that you can do to reduce it. So one of the things that you can do to reduce belief bias is to slow down. And so if you put people in a situation where they have to assess an argument quickly, they're much more prone to belief bias than if they have to take their time. Take it one step at a time and really go through it bit by bit. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to do some exercises that will probably strike you as very slow and boring, we're going to take cognitive processes that you usually zip through, just fly through. You don't even see yourself doing them because they're so fast and transparent. And we're going to take them to a screeching halt, a grinding halt, and do them very, very slowly. This will be annoying for you. This will bug you a bit, but it's good for you because what we're going to do is learn to slow down your cognitive processes, slow down your thinking, and see how the parts fit together. That's the plan for kind of the rest of the course, really. Okay. So that's the end of the talky bit. I propose to take another short break, and then we'll come back, and I'm going to hand out these short assignments that you work on either by yourself or in pairs or small groups, whichever you prefer. We'll do that for maybe half an hour or however long it sort of takes you. Well, I probably gave you too many questions to do in the time we have, but we'll get through as many as we do, and then we'll come back together afterwards and talk about the answers. Sound good? Okay, so let's take 5 minutes and then start the exercises.